What are some of the more iconic memories of Prince Charles's time here in Australia?
Well, the number one iconic memory, of course, was when he was still a bachelor and he was kissed on the beach in Cottesloe in WA. He was coming out of the water. A very pretty young model, 26-year-old model Jane Priest, ran up to him, planted a kiss on him. She was kind of set up to do it by a photographer, and I've worked a lot with British photographers, and I know they always want the picture, but at the time there was this sort of thought that it made him look more dateable. And of course, not long after that, he met his wife, Princess Diana. So maybe it worked.
What about that interview on Countdown, Molly Meldrum with a young Prince Charles? What a disaster.
That interview with Molly Meldrum, when the then Prince Charles sat down, and look, Charles trying not to laugh, but Molly just totally losing it, sweating, swearing, can't get his words right. I mean, it's one of the funniest things. And then, of course, the king, well, then he was the prince, his then takedown of that when it was a Countdown anniversary, and the way that he just took the mickey out of Molly Meldrum, I thought was hilarious. And it shows the royals, you know, the Queen has a sense of humour. The Paddington Bear video, all sorts of things. I think they really like to engage with ordinary people and ordinary life, and sometimes when things go wrong, it creates memories for them. We just don't need it to be picture perfect all the time. That's the things that make their working lives memorable, I think.
There was also an attempt on his life. It was back in 1994. What happened?
He was down at Tumbalong Park in Darling Harbour. He was about to give awards to two young people who were coming up. He actually, he's standing on the stage and there's the sound of two shots. And if you look at the video of it, you hear these shots and he's sort of fiddling with his cufflinks and he doesn't quite know what's happened straight away. And then what happens is he's pushed out of the way by a security guard. In fact, the then Premier got involved and tried to tussle this man. It was something called a starter gun. He wasn't hit, or shot. The shots didn't hit him, but a little bit unnerving, of course. He later said, you know, in an interview that, you know, you think that you're going to react like James Bond or Indiana Jones, but you don't. That's not how you respond. You sort of freeze. But it gave him some... you know, you contemplate what that role means. And of course, he then, when the recent Trump attempted assassination, he sent a letter to Donald Trump to, you know, mark the fact that it must have been scary for him and to give his condolences to the person that died in that shooting. So it obviously, there's a connection there still with him after all these years.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about Charles and Diana's visit back in 1983. This was their first overseas tour together. How did it go? How would you describe it?
That trip went very well for Diana, of course, because she's a 22-year-old. She brings her 10-month-old beautiful baby, and she is just a superstar. She stands out there in her dresses. She's dancing. She's meeting people. She's on the, on the radio. She is gorgeous, and her voice. We wanted to hear her voice because we'd seen pictures of her, but for the first time in Australia, we actually got to hear her to see what she sounded like. Not so good for Charles, unfortunately, because not long before in Wales, he'd made a comment to one of the Queen's friends, Queen's cousins, saying that, she now gets all the attention, or words to that effect. And that was crystallised in the trip to Australia, that there was this young, beautiful, dynamic woman who suddenly everybody wanted to shake hands with or wanted to smile at or have a chat to. And so when the moment that they'd go one direction, she'd go one, he'd go the other, he'd almost hear a sigh when the people on his side that they weren't going to get Diana. So a tricky trip, but kudos to that couple because, of course, it was the first time that a baby had been brought on a royal tour. So, you know, it paved the way for Meghan and Harry and, of course, Kate and William to bring their children on trips in the future. So she was a groundbreaker.
Was this the first chink in their marriage? Did the Australia trip tip that marriage over the edge?
Look, they'd only been married a couple of years. They hadn't had Prince Harry at that stage. Look, very early on, even from their honeymoon, we know from Diana, her true story, the book where she spoke to Andrew Morton about her experiences, that even from the honeymoon, she realised that there were areas of incompatibility, of course. I think this highlighted that when they were working together, there were going to be some issues. But she was still very much in love with him at that stage, and he her, but in the whatever love means kind of landscape. I mean, clearly his feelings for Camilla are evident. You can see his happiness. In fact, I was listening to old interviews and I really realised how much happier he is now, and how, it was obviously a failed marriage. They weren't compatible. There was a huge age difference. They had hugely different interests, and that became apparent on the Australian trip.